Slavery is back.
Welcome to a place where private business profit from a captive labour force, yet pennies are spent on medical services to a population in which the Indigenous, the poor and the mentally ill are overrepresented. Where isolation, humiliation and degradation are facts of life. Welcome to prison.
It depends who's telling the story, I suppose. The prisoners would have one view, the people who work in the prison system would have another, and I think it's up to people to decide where the truth is.
Give government propaganda and the media spin doctors the flick. And check out Doin' Time for news, views and tunes on prison issues from Guantanamo Bay to Christmas Island to prisons and detention centres everywhere. Every Monday at 4 p.m. on your community radio 3CR.
We are still fired up and we're still talking about revolution.
Hello and welcome to the Doin' Time show. This is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au. This is Marisa and I'll be taking you through until 5 o'clock this evening. And just a couple of things before we start. I'm just about to speak with Chris Breen from the Refugee Action Collective. Thousands at Melbourne Palm Sunday yesterday walked to call for an end to suffering on Manus and Nauru, and that was in Melbourne and across the country. Tens of thousands of people took to the streets in Palm Sunday actions calling for the fair and just treatment of all refugees and people seeking asylum. And so we'll be speaking with Chris about that and speaking to him about some of the interesting policies coming up to the federal election. I wouldn't call the policies interesting. Some of them are quite atrocious. And then after that, hopefully Ravi will be joining our discussion. He's a wonderful poet and asylum seeker as well, who is coming to the studio. And then after that, I'll be talking about a candlelight vigil in honour of Aboriginal deaths in custody. And that'll be at the Atherton Gardens from 5:30 till 7 near the Stolen Generation Maker, Atherton Gardens, on the corner of Brunswick and Gertrude Streets. So I'll be talking about that later. But for now, let's speak to Chris Breen from the Refugee Action Collective. Hello, Chris. Welcome to the program.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
It's lovely to have you. Now, Chris, I'm wondering if you could just talk about the action yesterday and a little bit of background and what's going on.
Yes, we had a rally walk for justice for refugees. There were, maybe up to 10,000 people at the rally who were protesting. The main message that we were sending is that Manus and Nauru need to close and that the refugees need to be brought here. Scott Morrison, the coalition, have already started attack ads on Facebook about refugees, saying Australia can't afford more refugees. But there are thousands of refugees on Manus and Nauru who can't afford, another coalition government. There are 30,000 in the community on temporary protection visas who can't afford another coalition government. And so that was the message that we were sending out. So we want Morrison out, we want refugees in, but we're also sending a message, I guess, to a potential Shorten government that we're going to keep up the fight until Manus and Nauru are closed, because at the moment the Bill Shorten says that Labor wants to clear Manus and Nauru. They would send 150 people to New Zealand, but that still leaves 800 in limbo. They don't have third countries, and so we're saying that after New Zealand, after America, the US deal's exhausted. The only realistic third country is Australia, and a Shorten government needs to stop the excuses and delays. Well, a Shorten government, I'm speaking ahead of time. Yeah. Stop the excuses and delays and commit to bring the refugees here.
So the Labor government isn't proposing to do that? Leading up to the federal election, they're not promising that?
Or a possible Labor government if they won the election. No,
yeah,
they're saying that they'll clear Manus and Nauru, but their Labor conference, they refuse to put time limits on it. And so they're not saying where they would send the people other than the 150 people to New Zealand. They say third countries, but there aren't third countries any more than the Liberals have got third countries at the moment.
Absolutely. So it's interesting that there's not really a coherent refugee policy at the moment, is there?
Well, there is a coherent refugee policy, and it's all about fear-mongering and scapegoating and demonising. I mean, we saw that with the Morrison reopening Christmas Island for $185 million and not sending a single refugee there. And it was all on the basis of his lie that sick refugees, because of the Medivac bill, who come here, they could be pedophiles, rapists or murderers. And after making that smear a month after, it's actually an Australian guard who's been charged with sexual assault on Manus, and Morrison had nothing to say about that. And interestingly, I mean, Baruz Buchani, who spoke via video at the rally, made the point that it's that sort of fear-mongering that on the one hand Australia has brought violence to Manus and Nauru, but that fear-mongering amongst Australia's politicians, the Islamophobia from Scott Morrison, is the sort of fear-mongering that's allowed the far right to grow and that's responsible for the Christchurch massacre in New Zealand.
Indeed. Yeah, and the Christchurch massacre, I mean, what are the implications there?
Well,
refugees?
I mean, it's horrific, and I think it goes to the hate speech that comes not just from Pauline Hanson and Fraser Anning, but I think from the centre of Australian politics. So, you know, Peter Dutton smeared the entire Lebanese community as terrorists, saying they should never have come here. They wanted to prioritise white South African farmers who don't face persecution but wouldn't take a single Rohingyan farmer. You know, hundreds of thousands fleeing in Australia's backyard because they're Muslims. In the Syrian refugee intake, Christians were prioritised over Muslims, and all of that sort of racism allows the far right to flourish, and there needs to be some responsibility taken at the centre of Australian politics. The other thing that was quite good, Michelle O'Neill, who's the ACTU president, spoke at the rally, and she said that Australian working people should be more afraid of billionaires on yachts than a couple of thousand asylum seekers who want to come here by boats, and I think that's very true. Absolutely.
It is very true. Yeah. What do you do, Chris, huh?
Sorry, I just had to cover the microphone. I had a bit of a cough. Can you repeat that?
What do you do? I mean, she's right.
What do you do? Well, you have to stand up against it in the first place. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we organise the rallies and that we are going to keep fighting no matter who wins the election. I mean, the refugee movement has made a difference. I mean, Scott Morrison himself was the person who sent a video message to the families on Nauru saying they would never be resettled in Australia. Even he's had to back down and bring the kids off. Everything that damages children damages adults, and so we say it's time to get everybody off. We have seen some small breaks in the bipartisan consensus, despite, you know, short and tragically being still committed to offshore processing and boat turnbacks. They did break and pass the Medivac bill. Scott Morrison defeated on the floor of Parliament. They are saying they're going to get rid of temporary protection visas and bring back permanent protection. So there are some small cracks there, but it's not enough. And we are going to keep campaigning until we've got everybody off Nauru and we've got humane refugee policy in this country.
So you had a number of speakers yesterday at the State Library, which was Sunday the 14th of April, and you mentioned the guy that's on Manus Island. What's his name?
Baruz Buchani.
He won the
Victorian Premier's Literary Award for his book No Friend But the Mountains.
And he's an Iranian journalist who fled and sought refuge in Australia, and he's being held on Manus?
Yes.
And he spoke
Iranian
by phone.
Kurdish journalist. He's been there for almost 6 years, like all the people. Actually, the Media Arts and Entertainment Alliance have now got a campaign to free him, which is very good.
Yeah, so he's campaigning from there, which is fantastic.
Yes, he's campaigning from Manus. He's still a prisoner on Manus, along with everybody else there, the other refugees.
And it's interesting because you guys have from the Refugee Action Collective have put a great quote in your media release there, where he says, "I would like to ask the Australian people to condemn this kind of violence and the politicians and media who have contributed to this violence with their words." So I believe he was talking there about the Christchurch attacks as well.
Yes, he was. I mean, he made quite a point about making a link between the violence on Manus and Nauru and the violence that happened at Christchurch, and that the same politicians bear responsibility. I mean, directly on Manus and Nauru, and indirectly in terms of Christchurch, but that responsibility is still there.
And Richard Flanagan, there was also a quote from Richard Flanagan as well in the media release.
Yes, Richard Flanagan, who the author, also a friend of Beirut's, also spoke strongly the need to close Manus and Nauru, spoke for the need for a royal commission into the horror of the detention camps, and I mean particularly about the 12 deaths that there have been there. And actually, just it was 2 days ago, maybe 3 days ago now, there was a friend of Beirut's who had been on Manus, who was forced back to Vietnam, who was killed in Vietnam. And we don't yet know the circumstances of his death, if they were to do with the fears that he had for going back there. But he should never have been deported. He should never have been, made to live in fear.
Certainly not.
And some of the other speakers we had also, Lavanya Savaraja from the Tamil Refugee Council, and she particularly talked about some of the long-term detainees, like the case of Sanjan, who's been in detention for 10 years now. He was recently diagnosed with cancer, and he is still not being allowed out. It is a crime what is being done to people.
It is an absolute crime. And are there any other events coming up?
We are having a forum on Monday, April the 29th at 6:30 at the Nurses Union, which is 535 Elizabeth Street, on the case to close the camps and welcome the boats. Because sometimes there are people who have argued that, we should accept a compromise to accept boat turnbacks, and then we'd be able to close the camps, and we think that wouldn't work, and you shouldn't trade off one rights for another.
Absolutely.
So we've got Dr. Savitri Taylor, who's part of Refugee Legal, and a law professor, associate professor who's speaking, Lavanya who's speaking, and a speaker from RAC. So people, please come along to that. And then I guess the next thing is after the election on Saturday, July 20, on the 6th anniversary, July 19th is the 6th anniversary of the PNG announcement, when Kevin Rudd said that people would be sent to Manus and they would never be resettled in Australia. And so we've called a rally for that date after the election to say it's time that the camps have to close. Because I think a lot of people, if we do get a Labor government, and certainly I want to get rid of Morrison, will be expecting that there'll be change.
I really hope so, and I hope that Labor is able to take out that they're not going to turn back boats in their policy, because there was something about.
No, sadly, that is still Labor
there?
policy.
That they want to turn back the boats.
Refugees coming on boats are no threat. Boat turnbacks put lives at risk. They send refugees back to danger. The other policy, which is quite important, and I don't think Labor's made its position clear on it yet. There's currently about 14,000 refugees, UNHCR recognised refugees, who are stranded in Indonesia and who are destitute. They're not able to come here. Australia used to be the biggest resettler, but Abbott had a ban. And so overturning that ban is also going to be an important part of refugee policy.
Just to alert listeners, and just a bit of a postscript to my introduction at the beginning, we're going to be interviewing David Shoebridge, Greens MP, shortly, later on at 4:30, and I will be asking him, Chris, about his policy for refugees. Or not his policy, but the policy of the Greens Party.
That's good. David will be good, and generally the Greens have had a very good position. We've had some minor debates around regional processing, but they are certainly saying close Manus and Nauru and bring the refugees here, and that's important.
Absolutely. So, yeah, we'll be interviewing David Shoebridge. This is a special broadcast today about deaths in custody. And indeed, there's a website called deathscapes.org. And on that website, you will find not only Aboriginal deaths in custody, but also refugees who have died in detention. So you might want to have a look at that, Chris, sometime.
Okay.
We had
Thank
our
you for that.
recent symposium in Sydney a couple of weeks ago. Now, I'm just going to check if Ravi's here. Hello, Ravi. No, he's not here yet. So I'm afraid, Chris, that he can't join us for this discussion, but hopefully he'll be coming soon. Chris, can you just...
That's a shame. I mean, Ravi has been a long time spoken out about refugees. You know, he spent time on Nauru. His story is well worth listening to.
Well worth listening to indeed. And I'm hoping that he will be able to come. He was stuck in traffic. So we'll have a look at that. Chris, thank you so much. Can you just give us the website for the Refugee Action Collective?
Our website is rac-vic.org.
Thank you so much.
Just Google Refugee Action Collective, you'll find it.
That's lovely. Thank you so much for coming onto the program, Chris.
Thank you for having me on.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye. And that was Chris Breen from the Refugee Action Collective, speaking about refugee rights and asylum seekers, and having a look at some of the policies of the governments, the parties before the federal election or leading up to the federal election.
The federal election is on Saturday, the 18th of May. If you are serving a full-time sentence of less than 3 years, you are eligible to vote. You can enrol or update your details on the Australian Electoral Commission's website at www.aec.gov.au. You will also need to apply for a postal vote. You can do this online or by contacting the Australian Electoral Commission via telephone on 132326. Hard copy forms will also be available in most prisons. Please ask staff for assistance. The Australian Electoral Commission is a 3CR supporter.
And you're back with the Doing Time show, and we're just keeping an eye here on Ravi. So while we're waiting for him, just wanted to speak a little bit about Aboriginal deaths in custody because it is the anniversary of the Royal Commission. And it's an absolute disgrace that on this anniversary of Bob Hawke announcing the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, that most of the 339 recommendations haven't been upheld. And just a warning to listeners, especially to Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders, that we will be talking about people that have died. So, one of those people was Mr. Clark's atrocious death because of the failure by racist police to exercise duty of care. This show is as much about police corruption and institutional racism as it is about deaths in custody. And we're here today to honour all people that have died in custody. And in this climate of racist police brutality and violence, I need to ask listeners this crucial question: has anything really changed since calls for the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody by families who fought for their loved ones who died in suspicious circumstances, including Eddie Murray in 1981, Robert Walker and Charles Michael in 1984, Tony King, Dixon Green and Douglas Scott in 1985, and Lloyd Boney in 1987, amongst many others. The Commission was finally announced on 10th August 1987 by then Prime Minister Robert Hawke in response to growing public concern. The Commission would never have been called were it not for tenacious fighters such as Leela, Arthur and Anna Murray and Letty Scott. Their contribution towards building the movement to stop Aboriginal deaths in custody and to spark independent investigations to put an end to police investigating police. Both the Murrays and the Scotts fought for the bodies of Douglas and Eddie to be exhumed. Both autopsy reports revealed injuries and evidence of torture in Douglas's case, inconsistent to the open findings of suicide by hanging. Civilian review boards are important, and they need to be established to hold racist cops to account. I'd like to draw your attention to some very important anniversaries. The 31st anniversary of the death of Eddie Murray and the 27th anniversary of the death of Douglas Scott, who both died in custody in deplorably suspicious circumstances. 29 years, sorry. 20th June, the anniversary of an all-white jury acquitting Chris Hurley after his involvement in the death of Malungi Damaji in November 2004 on Palm Island. 19th July, the anniversary of the gagging of Lex Watton. Lex was jailed for his role in a justified protest by the Palm Island community against yet another whitewash of a death in police custody. He was stripped of his human rights and politically gagged since his release, while Chris Hurley has been promoted and compensated. Lex was sentenced to 6 years in prison. A full implementation of the 339 recommendations of the 1987 to 1991 Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody is important. It is a known fact the First Nations people are imprisoned at a much higher rate than non-Indigenous people. It is also another known fact that the 339 recommendations of the Royal Commission are not being upheld, including the one that advocates prison be a last resort. Implement Recommendation 92. Imprisonment must be sanction of last resort. And this is that particular recommendation adheres to the death in custody of 22-year-old woman Julika Dew, or Miss Dew. And of course, there's the more recent ones, David Dungai, and who we have extensively interviewed his mother on this show, and Auntie Tanya Day, of course, who died last year. And I'll play you an announcement of a petition that's actually going around at the moment about abolishing public drunken laws. She may have been alive today. So I'm just going to quickly advertise a candlelight vigil that's happening in honour of Aboriginal deaths in custody, 5:30 to 7. It's near the Stolen Generations Maker, Atherton Gardens. And Monday, 15th of April, marks 28 years since the end of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody in 1981. And since then, more than 411 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have died in custody. We'll remember every one of those individuals and their families, many of them who are still fighting for justice. And so rock up there and see if you can light candles for all the people who've died in custody, their families, communities and nations. Many of the Royal Commission recommendations continue to be ignored by successive governments. The system has continued to fail Aboriginal people, and this is why they are still losing their loved ones. And I was going to actually interview perhaps some Aboriginal families, and we usually do. Look, we interview. The Doing Time show is instrumental in interviewing Aboriginal families throughout the whole year. And for some reason today, I couldn't find anybody. And that's because people have been traumatised, and there is a lot of grief, and sometimes people just don't want to come on, or can't come on. So I thought that I would actually quote some sections out of a speech that I made some years ago now when I was doing some work with ISJA. So I hope that people got something out of that. So rock up to that the vigil. You know, there are mums and dads and sisters, brothers, cousins, and much loved community members. And we need communities, not prisons. It's approximately 4:23. I don't know where Ravi is, but I think I'm going to put on a song now. And this song is actually by Ruby Hunter. And I believe it's called Unfinished Business. But before I do that, I'll put on the petition about as a result of what happened with Auntie Tanya Day last year.
The federal election is on Saturday, the 18th of May. If you are serving a full-time sentence of less than 3 years, you are eligible to vote. You can enrol or update your details on the Australian Electoral Commission's website at www.aec.gov.au. You will also need to apply for a postal vote. You can do this online or by contacting the Australian Electoral Commission via telephone on 132326. Hard copy forms will also be available in most prisons. Please ask staff for assistance. The Australian Electoral Commission is a 3CR supporter.
In December 2017, Tanya Day, proud Yorta Yorta woman and much-loved member of the Aboriginal community, was travelling by train to Melbourne. When V-Line staff found her asleep, they called Castlemaine Police and she was removed from the train and charged with public drunkenness. Tanya died 17 days later as a result of head injuries sustained while in custody. This would never have happened had the recommendations of the 2001 Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody been implemented. Tanya Day's family is calling for the crime of public drunkenness to be abolished and for the implementation of genuine community health alternatives to incarceration. Please add your support by signing the petition at 3CR Reception, 21 Smith Street, Fitzroy, or online by entering Tanya Day petition into your browser.
Are you 18 years and over? Have you been stopped by a Victorian police officer or protective service officer in the last 10 years? Would you like to contribute to research that aims to inform law reform and litigation strategies to prevent over-policing? Go to policestopsurvey.online for more information and to take part. That's policestopsurvey.online, a 3CR supporter.
This is Irene Bolger, former Secretary of the Nurses Federation in Victoria. Throughout the nurses dispute in 1986 and the waterfront dispute in 1998, 3CR was always there, broadcasting the voices of workers in struggle.
You're listening to 3CR Community Radio and we're broadcasting live from the Beta Chicken Strike here in Melbourne.
We've just seen all of the thousands of nurses walk through to their meeting and people from different unions showing their solidarity.
3CR, radio for the workers, by the workers, since 1976.
Hi, my name is Lex Wharton and I listen to 3CR and I hope you do too. I hope that you could support 3CR in its radiothon because 3CR supports the fight for communities and support in all areas of struggles. So please listen to 3CR. Black brother Murray and I'm taking it back to the days when they never even heard of rap.
This is Irene Bolger, former Secretary of the Nurses Federation in Victoria. Throughout the nurses dispute in 1986 and the waterfront dispute in 1998, 3CR was always there, broadcasting the voices of workers in struggle.
You're listening to 3CR Community Radio and we're broadcasting live from the Beta Chicken Strike here in Melbourne.
We've just seen all of the thousands of nurses walk through to their meeting and people from different unions showing their solidarity.
3CR, radio for the workers, by the workers, since 1976.
We Need to Pay the Rent is a fundraiser for warriors of the Aboriginal resistance featuring the Pretty Littles, Worst Nurse, Ute Root, No Sister, Face, and a heap more. Come join us on Kulin Nation land to give back. It's well overdue. We need to pay the rent. Saturday, May the 18th at the Tote from 4 p.m. Tickets $20. Available from the Tote website, thetotehotel.com. Free or discounted tickets for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Contact organisers online to arrange. A 3CR supporter.
And you're back with the Doing Time show. And hopefully, we've had a couple of technical difficulties, but hopefully we have David Shoebridge on the line now.
Well, I hope I'm here. Is that right?
Oh, David, it's lovely to have you.
I see you too. I could hear you before. There's nothing more powerless than I could hear you all on but you couldn't hear me. I was
Yeah.
screaming in the darkness. Yep.
Oh, this is guerrilla radio. We need more funds.
Yeah, of course you do. Yep.
David, it's lovely to have you. And I was just talking before about the Aboriginal Deaths in Custody anniversary today of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, 15th of April. And I thought it would be lovely to actually have you on the show as a Greens MP and also as Ray Jackson being your mentor, because he was instrumental in doing a lot of extensive work, hasn't he, for Aboriginal people, particularly deaths in custody. Could you just talk about leading up to the federal election, if you win, obviously? There's a couple of very good policies, and there's a website dedicated to deaths in custody, isn't there?
Yeah, there sure is. Well, I mean, for me, the first and best way to stop First Nations peoples dying in jail is we just stop jailing First Nations peoples at the rate we have been doing, and at historically increasing rates, which is what we're seeing across the country. You know, a young Aboriginal young man aged under 25 is around about 25 times more likely to be in jail than a non-Aboriginal counterpart. I mean, it's just those kind of rates just blow your mind. And I've been in state parliaments and I've seen the same thing happening federally. We're just year in, year out, we keep passing more laws that we know will work unfairly against First Nations people and put more Aboriginal people in jail. And so the first thing we need to do to address deaths in custody is to stop doing that, to stop making laws that put more Aboriginal people in jail. But then, you know, I mean, there have been over 300 recommendations sitting around for, 3 decades from that Royal Commission, waiting to be implemented by a government that finally has courage. And you know, it's about time we did that. We need a properly funded national early alert phone system. And, you know, every year that seems to be a battle to get it funded across the country. A phone call, a phone alert, Aboriginal legal service, where as soon as Aboriginal people or Torres Strait people are arrested, they have an immediate access to a lawyer who's immediately in their corner. And we know that saves lives. It's been saving lives in the ACT in New South Wales now for decades. And it's always a political football about whether that'll be funded across the rest of the country. We need that rock-solid commitment to fund that. But you know, behind all of this needs to be a commitment to self-determination and not just a voice to Parliament, but genuine control of First Nations people's families, communities, culture and heritage by First Nations peoples. And, you know, that means the hard work of treaty and lots more.
Yes, and we were talking about treaty a couple of weeks ago. Listeners may recall that we had an interview with David a couple of weeks ago about this, and indeed, David, I was hoping that we were going to have Ravi in here because obviously there have been deaths in custody of refugees and asylum seekers in detention. Ravi is actually an asylum seeker who came by boat here and who's in the community now. And he was going to join us for this discussion, but unfortunately he hasn't been able to make it. But
I'll tell you, the people in society who most understand the brutality that refugees are facing, this sort of unthinking violence and incarceration that we're visiting against, as a society we're visiting against refugees, the people who most get it are Aboriginal people. Because, I mean, they've seen this aggressive, violent, invasive colonisation approach now for 230 years. And they just see it playing out its usual brutality in this time against people coming here for asylum. And then, you know, I go to refugee rallies. I'm a Greens MP, right? I go to refugee rallies. And there's always such strong solidarity from First Nations peoples. And when I come to rallies for Indigenous rights, I find some of the strongest supporters people from other marginalised communities who also get it. And that's a growing political voice, I've got to tell you. It's a growing, strengthening sense of solidarity across the cultural spectrum, and I find it pretty exciting.
It really is, and in fact, It would have been great to have Ravi here, but he's not. Hopefully they'll bring him in. But getting back to the New South Wales records, into Rebecca Ma, I believe that you were interviewed on Nit TV. I was having a look at through Google the other day, and she was in New South Wales, wasn't she? The Aboriginal woman that died in custody.
She was. She was up in, if people are aware of New South Wales geography, just outside of Newcastle, just northwest of Newcastle. Young woman who had a troubled history, no question about it. And the police said they arrested her. They didn't charge her. They arrested her for her own good. They said because they arrested her for her own good, and because they didn't charge her with a criminal offence, they said they didn't have to call the helpline, because the helpline they're only legislatively required to call the helpline if they arrest and charge a First Nations person. But in this case, they didn't charge her. They arrested her, they said, to because they said she was intoxicated. Anyhow, no helpline called, no help was given, and a few short hours later, Rebecca was dead in a police cell. Another death in custody.
At Maitland Police Station.
Yeah. And, this culpable failure to call the helpline, they weren't legislatively required to do it. And we've been saying to the government now for the better part of 2 and a bit years, well, we can see that there's a problem here. Let's fix up the laws. Let's fix up the regulations and say whenever a First Nations person is arrested, whether they're charged or not, if they're put in cells, call the helpline. Make it a requirement to call the helpline. The government has been refusing to act, saying, they just want to wait until they see what the coronial inquest is. Well, politicians have an obligation to step up and act when we see a death like this, and we can't even get that. I find that very frustrating. And, when we have another tragic death, at least learn from it. Fix something. That's what we need to fix. One of the things we need to fix, apart from that brutal indifference they showed to Rebecca once they arrested her. But we need to fix that part of the law. So someone should have been in her corner from the very outset, and no one was.
She wasn't even charged for anything. And really, why wasn't the hotline contacted? Why wasn't Rebecca Ma put in a safe place? And other Aboriginal people too. Miss Dew, Auntie Tanya Day, who died last year, and there's an inquest happening as we speak now. All these
David
people,
Dungay, who was not only deeply unwell, but was, brutally assaulted by prison authorities in jail. You have to ask when it will end. And the idea that in many of these cases, the police say, or the corrective services authorities will be saying, what we did for David's best interest, or we did for Rebecca's interest, or we did because it was for Ms. Dew's best interest. But, that rings so hollow when the people who keep dying in custody keep being First Nations people. And they're put in unsupervised cells, treated with a brutal indifference. I see a lot of it in New South Wales, but I think some of the brutality we see in places like the NT and WA even makes New South Wales, is even worse than we're seeing here in New South Wales. So there's a sense of pain and a sense of injustice across the country.
Indeed there is. And in fact, one of the things that is quite disappointing in media is that 3CR is and also other Aboriginal stations, 3CR isn't just Aboriginal, but they have a lot of Aboriginal programs here. This station is about working with people who are deprived of a voice. And across the board, with ABC Radio, ABC TV, Channel 7, they don't talk about the recommendations. They don't talk about them in detail.
Well, 330-odd recommendations. Now, you can argue about whether they've been implemented or partially implemented, but I can tell you now the bulk of them have not been fully implemented.
Yeah.
And is it any wonder that Aboriginal people keep dying in custody? You have a Royal Commission to come up with answers and solutions. This one was very expensive and very lengthy. But at the end of the day, it came up with a whole bundle of essential recommendations, the bulk of which haven't been implemented. And I think we should also remember about this Royal Commission that it wasn't as though it was a super soft pro-First Nations, pro-Aboriginal Royal Commission. It was far from that. It reviewed the better, 100 or so deaths in custody, and despite some pretty bloody, brutal evidence, it found not one of those was there sufficient evidence to even consider charging police or corrective services. Not one. Now, I can't imagine how that happened. So it was a Royal Commission that was, a long way from being a far left kind of kangaroo court against the police and custodial authorities. It was in my mind, extraordinarily, excessively generous towards them. Yet it still came up with 330 recommendations. But the recommendations even of that Royal Commission, which was, as I said, quite soft on the police and the corrective services authorities, we can't even implement those recommendations.
Well, that's right.
Imagine if they'd actually come out and said, you know what, stop jailing Aboriginal people.
That's
free
right.
Aboriginal people. Change the substantive laws.
Well, I'm glad that that the Greens are doing that. But just to look at the recommendations, Recommendation 87, arrest people only when there is no other way of dealing with the problem. Recommendation 92 states imprisonment should be utilised only as a sanction of last resort. Recommendation 121 is for old fines to be waived, which is the total opposite of the West Australian prison, for fines policy. And it goes on.
Oh, and getting rid of short sentences. I mean, what on earth we're doing jailing people for 6 months or less? I don't know. And yet some of the people who are routinely jailed for short sentences are disproportionately Aboriginal people. But our bail laws, there are a series of recommendations about bail laws, about, remand being, where someone is held in custody before a trial. Remand should be a last resort. The principle should be people are released. But we've seen pretty much every state and territory make some seriously backward changes to their bail laws, so that routinely, one third of the people in jail tonight in New South Wales jails, 1/3 of them haven't actually been convicted of anything. They're sitting there on remand waiting for trial. 1/3. Amazing.
That's crazy. That's just... Who are the real criminals here, I'm wondering. So, David, just to summarise then, if the Greens were to be elected, what would be different? What would change?
Well, if the Greens are essential, as I hope they will be, to a federal Labor government getting its legislation through or not, that's when we sit down with them and say, well, you want our votes? You want us to sit down and support your political project? Well, it's about time you sat down and listened to not just our political project, but the political project we're hearing from this growing movement of First Nations peoples across the country. And so let's find that place to sit down and work out what the priorities for First Nations and Aboriginal people are. I mean, we have our policy platform, which is a thorough review and a commitment for the Commonwealth to legislate each and every part of each and every one of those Black Deaths in Custody Royal Commissions, each and every one of them, to properly fund states that are doing the right thing by putting in place diversionary programs, and to penalise states that are failing to live up to their recommendations and requirements under the Royal Commission. And I think sometimes the biggest stick the Commonwealth has to deal with recalcitrant states who keep jailing and brutalising First Nations people, one of the biggest sticks they have is finances. And if you want finances for your justice systems from the Commonwealth, well, you meet these minimum principles. And that means reversing the rate of Aboriginal imprisonment. That means freeing Aboriginal people from jail. You don't do that, you don't get the money.
Yeah.
Pretty simple, really.
And stop taking Aboriginal land, all the corporations, all the mining, all the nuclear testing.
Well, more fundamental than that. Hand over decision-making on Aboriginal land, hand over decision-making on Aboriginal culture and heritage to Aboriginal decision-makers.
Yeah.
native title owners, registered claimants, elders, and in places like New South Wales Lands Council, have them collectively making the decision about Aboriginal heritage and culture. And when they say, do you know what, our land is too precious, don't mine it, that should be the end of it.
Although some Aboriginal communities and elders would say that native title is a farce.
I agree that the federal native title laws are a fraction of what the High Court originally proposed, and the High Court was only giving a fraction of traditional rights back to First Nations peoples. But I think we can all say that if there's a registered native title owner who's gone through all of those hoops and finally had native title recognised, I think we can all say that they should be the first port of call to make decisions about mining projects or any projects that damage the heritage and culture on their land. I think we could all say that. Not the only voice by any means, but they should be a primary voice that should be able to veto damage to culture, damage to country.
I'm really hoping that happens sometime. And, there are so many differing views, aren't there? I mean, do you actually work outside the system and get arrested and go to protests and get arrested and stuff? Or you don't normally necessarily get arrested if you go to a protest, but you know what I mean? Do you work outside, or can you work within the system?
Well, I think you have to do both together.
Absolutely.
I'm an MP. I'm stuck in this bloody system, for good or bad.
Yeah.
But I think you need some people like myself in there taking the fight up inside. But I'm only useful, and Greens MPs are only useful when we have the community behind us, when we have built social movements outside of Parliament and we force the buggers inside to actually take us seriously and take our agenda seriously. It's when we build that movement outside. So, I've always viewed the Greens' job is to be that link between that activist, growing, civil part of society and the Parliament, and we force change on Parliament. You don't magically fix the world by electing, a dozen or 2 dozen Greens MPs, but we can be a crucial link, and we can make action happen more quickly. That's our job.
David, thank you so much for coming on the program and at such short notice. And can you just give the website to listeners so they can have a look at the Deaths in Custody section?
Well, it's just on the federal Green. So just Google, Australian Greens First Nations Justice, and follow the links from there. I always think it's better to start with Google than me try and give you a link that people will end up garbling. So. And in fact, you could also have a look at the state package that we put up at the recent state election as well. So Australian Greens First Nations Justice, if you Google that, that's the best way of finding yourself to that site.
David, thanks so much for your time. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure. Good
Take
speaking,
care.
and thanks for all the work you guys do. I mean, we hear your voice even outside of Victoria, so we appreciate the work you guys do.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
And
Bye.
a cheerio to Ray Jackson. May he rest in peace.
Yeah, and all his family and mob. Yep.
Thanks. Bye-bye. And that was, I was only going to say Ray Jackson. That was David Shoebridge, Greens MP from New South Wales, speaking about deaths in custody. And Ravi, if you're out there, I'm terribly sorry. I'm not sure what happened there, but we're thinking of you. There's about 1 minute left before I'm out of here. We're going to be playing Black Fella, White Fella by the Rumpy Band. This is the Doin' Time show. And thank you to all our guests today. And it's goodbye from Marisa. And tune in every Monday from 4 till 5 for the Doin' Time show. And we've got Beyond Zero coming up next. Stay tuned. Bye. Look after each other.